Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, these two labels are showing ENCs as the type of worms that live in these bins. These ENCs are European night crawlers, and the systems were both launched on the same day, as you can see. The only distinction is that one bin is labeled ENC1, the other bin is labeled ENC2, but they both started off on the same day with what was estimated to be the same number of worms, about 2,500 worms or so. And later on, we ended up putting a few additional worms, maybe a couple hundred more, into bin number 2. So it's believed that bin number 2 is slightly more occupied than bin number 1. But they're not really that different when you get in there and look at them. It's been 12 days since we last fed these systems. And as of today, they are now 149 days of age. Their last feeding 12 days ago was their 12th feeding. Makes it really easy for me to remember. So I've got some stuff lined up to give them their 13th feeding today, so I'm going to get them up on the bench and get them fed. So let's get to work. Yep, it's another of my color-coordinated feedings. Today the color of the day is orange, and they're getting carrot, little baby carrots, and a lot of this stuff is so frozen together, I'm questioning how I'm going to separate it into two portions. Might have to get a little tool out and see if I could break this stuff apart a little bit better. It'd be nice if we could kind of spread this stuff out and not have to put it in a big frozen lump. So now, last time we checked in on these two systems, there was a little bit of concern about how muddy the material seemed somehow. Or at least I was a little bit concerned. So, you know, I was kind of glad that I had a bunch of these dry leaves I was able to spread across the top. I thought that to a certain degree that might suck in some of the ample moisture that the system appeared to be. I don't even know how to characterize it. You know, I don't want to say suffering from or whatever. I don't want to call it an ailment if it wasn't really an ailment, but it did seem like it had the potential to go so muddy that it might start clumping up, and it's at that point that I oftentimes worry if the material is really as healthy as it could be for the worms. So, you know, didn't want to take any drastic steps. Just figured give them their routine feeding, go back to covering with the plastic, and I didn't want to react, but I wanted to put the topic sort of on watch so that when I come back in here I could, you know, examine the system from that point of view to see whether anything has possibly improved or even degraded despite my last efforts. And they weren't real drastic efforts either, so it wasn't intended to be like an overnight fix. It was just kind of a nudge in the right direction to see if we could just put some other stuff in here that would suck up some of the moisture that appeared to be excessive. And I think we saw it best out on the outer edges of the system, where we didn't really add anything. We just, you know, put everything back kind of the way we found it. Down here in the middle is where we would have last fed. Now I did skim through the video really quick from the last feeding. I remember asparagus being put in here. Trying to remember what else it might have been. There was just something about the asparagus. It was just such the obvious standout food of whatever it was that was put in here. So we might see some leftovers. So far the only leftovers I've encountered are little bits of corn cob. I've been stacking them up over here on the side. And those are going back quite a few visits at this point. And they're getting there, but they take a long time. So a number of them are going to be found in here. I think the other one has a few too, but I think there may have been more in one or the other. I can't remember which one had more corn cob leftovers in it. But I do keep bumping into them. And every time you see one, there's always worms hanging out on it or near it, or probably even in it. So if we were to crack one of these open, you can see the worms huddled up inside, enjoying the yummy corn cob. But it's a really slow composting item when you put it in your worm bin, so don't hold your breath. If you've got corn cobs, I mean, it's the end of the summer in my part of the world, and for us, corn cob is usually sort of those summer sort of foods. So it kind of marks the end of summer when there's no more corn cobs, so these go back a couple months at this point at least, I would say. So I like the more crumbly feel of the material in here, but then again, we are in the feeding area where there would have been a bunch of fresh bedding applied and the worms have been really active moving stuff around. So I'll be maybe a little more satisfied when I get a chance to see how things in the outskirts of the bin are doing. So let's start piling in some stuff. And I like the idea of using this leafy material that was spread out across the top. We can always replace it with some nice fresh stuff that's dry, more dry than this, and sprinkle out across the top if we think it'll be beneficial to do so. But this stuff, now that it's been in the bin for almost 2 weeks, has got nice, probably a nice inundation of, you know, microscopic life forms sort of implanted in and on the material. As soon as we dump some nice food on top of it and we start spurring on the worm activity in here, it'll be game over for those bits of leaves. So now I'm going to save the rest for the other system, and then we'll chip off about what appears to be half of these pumpkin bits. These appear to dislodge themselves from each other a little bit more easily. This is the sort of food I really don't expect to last very long. I think if we came back in another 12 days or 2 weeks, we would probably find little or no signs of any of this pumpkin. So I think I think we left about the same amount for the next system. We're just going to feed them as if they're identical in populations, even though it is estimated that the other system was launched with possibly a few extra 100 worms in the very beginning. So, well, you know, this is where I get to put the poor worms that are inhabiting those leftover foods that we found along the way right into the feeding area. Always needing to come back to my little storyline of exposing the worms to the cold. Perhaps someday I'll get over it and stop using that anecdote, because I don't think it's a big deal, really. A couple worms bumping into some frozen stuff, I don't think it's going to do them in. I'm sure they'll find it to be a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm sure they could survive it. That looks like quite a nice feeding. So I think we can start covering it up now. Let's just start using some of this more loose stuff over here. It seems to have fewer worms in it. I was going to grab a pile of this, but this is all loaded with worms. Oh, look at that. Finally, I thought we wouldn't see any. I was a little bit surprised that we didn't until now. And I think the asparagus actually went in last time. Or did we put in asparagus last time? For some reason, I'm remembering asparagus is showing up as a leftover in some bins, and in other bins, it may have been put in as a fresh food item last time. And now I'm not 100% sure what the story was anymore. But I do sort of remember during the last feeding having a big pile of those and it going back in, and then maybe there was some fresh asparagus added too. I don't know. Alright, you know, before we close up the shop here, I'm just trying to get the little bits of leftover food I might have left out here on the surface kind of over in the middle into the feeding area. But, you know, before we cover up, let's see how things in the outskirts look. Once again, pretty damp, but just the fact that it's loaded with worms immediately dispels my concerns. If it was damp and clumping together and had no worm activity in it, that would worry me. But excess moisture like this I don't think is a big deal, as long as the worms are digging it and as long as it's some stuff that the worms can get in and out of. It's just that when it starts to clump together, that's when it concerns me. That's what I'm getting the sense that the stuff just doesn't seem to have like any oxygen content. If it did, I'm sure the worms would be all over it, so it starts to make me wonder if it's going anaerobic, which just means it's lost its oxygen supply, and that means, you know, it's not going to have healthy bacteria growing in it due to the lack of oxygen. The worms won't be interested in hanging out in it due to it being depleted of oxygen. So a little stir here and there usually helps solve that. It's not a drastic issue that can't be dealt with usually, but if it's left to just degrade and not be managed, then it could really end up becoming a harmful space for the worms to be in. So now I'm just trying to remember, so I might take a peek. Did I? Yeah. I just looked over to see if I was, you know, I have my grit there on the standby on the ready. I just couldn't remember if I sprinkled any in onto the feeding. So before we cover up, I like the idea of putting more leaves down. I'm not sure how much it helped, but it did seem like it might have sucked in some of the moisture from the system. I don't mind it continuing to do that. So I'm going to put in some more for that reason. Usually a handful or two of these leaves are enough to coat the entire top surface, and that's probably all we really need in here. Sometimes I like to put it on because it just looks nicer. I think it looks kind of cool, like the forest floor in the autumn, after all the leaves have fallen off the trees and started drying on the ground. So I also think it's got the potential to possibly suck some moisture in it too. So the plastic will go back on like it did after the last check-in. And we'll put this top covering on as well. A little surprised to see how well this top covering is holding up. I thought that it might just, you know, see a little bit more worm traffic and it might see a little bit more breakdown due to worms nibbling on it, but maybe that just means we're giving them so many yummy foods that that's what's really occupying their time. All right, let's go get bin number 2. All right, so like I said earlier, bin number 2 is the one that's thought to have possibly a few extra worms living in it. I can't say that that's absolutely sure, because even the original launch of the worms was done in a very, you know, unmeasured and unscientific way. It was just sort of an eyeballed splitting of the worm population. In the case of this top covering, I'm thinking maybe we can just include it with the leaves, and when we reuse these leaves as a foundation for today's feeding, we could just go ahead and drop that piece of paper in there too. I've got a whole pile of newspaper over here so we can get them a nice fresh piece. But that'll be at the end. We'll take care of getting them fed here first, and we'll do another inspection of the outer edges of the system as I've been doing in most of my systems lately. But it was here in this one that I noticed things looking a little bit out of sorts there. And it still seemed a little more damp than it needed to be. But as long as it's crammed with worms, I'm not too worried. We'll just get a new piece of newspaper, some dry leaves to spread across the top, and then we'll kind of continue with the same old regimen of trying to see if we can absorb some of the moisture that the system has in it into some of the materials that we put in, which are put in dry. All right. Here and there I'm feeling like here's one, but it just doesn't seem like there's as many corncob bits in this material I just excavated. I mean, I was kind of looking for them, thinking I'd set them aside. I do see some leftover asparagus here too. So maybe that expectation of this system having possibly a few more worms in it is true. Maybe it is just the observation we're making here is that what was probably an equal amount of food that was put in here from the previous feedings as well, you know, the same amount that would have been put into both systems appears to have been more ravaged and consumed here. Or maybe this one just got fewer corn cobs, I'm not sure. It's so cool how they're mobbing that little piece of asparagus right there. And I can see some of the bedding we put in here last time. I don't remember seeing quite so much of the bedding that we put in under the feeding in the other bin. But maybe we put more here, I don't know. I just have this thing where I'm sort of looking for differences, commonalities, and differences. And half the time I don't even trust my recollection of what I saw last time, so it's all extremely unscientific, trust me. Alright, a couple more corn cobs surfaced here and there. Oh, here's a pretty good sized one, but it seems so whittled down. It seems like it's just collapsing under the onslaught of the worms ripping into it. Very nice. So let's get them fed now too. I just can't seem to resist pulling out leftover corn cob bits. So So I like the idea of bringing in the recycled leaves off the top surface as the foundation. I don't think this stuff stands a chance against the worms once it gets put in contact with pumpkin and with carrots. Same goes for this piece of paper here. That's a pretty good foundation for today's feeding. And can come the remains of what we have for them here today. This piece here, I don't know, it's pretty frozen together. Oh, I managed to break it apart. And these come apart pretty readily. We may have put a little bit more food in here. It's just hard for me to tell when it's all clumped together like that, how much is how much, but if it is a bit more, I think the system can handle it. I don't think we're going to see many leftovers. These are both foods that the worms absolutely enjoy eating, and they usually can do so pretty quickly. I mean, they obviously enjoy eating the corn cob too, but it's just not something that they could rip to shreds as quickly as they can other things, and the pumpkin is one of those things that they can definitely just consume in its entirety almost immediately. So, always a fun feeding with these systems. Somehow, when you launch a system with what's anticipated or expected or estimated to be at least a couple thousand worms, you're going to find worms hanging out in almost all reaches of the bin. They are seemingly enjoying the space out here. I mean, if I could find some little scraps of leftover bits of this and that to scatter down into this material, I like that as an idea too, just to sort of get some other things in there other than just a bunch of damp castings. If we can put some other stuff out there in front of them to work on, that's a good thing. Gosh, this feeding is coming up pretty high over here. I'm having a hard time covering it. Alright, let's excavate this side, see how things look. Hopefully by tilling up the material down in here too, we'll have enough loose stuff to spread out all over and cover everything. Here and there I'm still bumping into a chunk of corn cob. Here too, the worms are all over this stuff, so I don't think there's reason for concern. Giving it a good till, dropping in a little bit of uncomposted materials for them to nibble on, creating little air pockets, I think is all beneficial. And you know, once those pieces of pumpkin start to melt and start breaking down, I think they're going to add a whole lot of extra moisture to this system that wasn't here before. So even though we're going to be dropping on dry leaves and a piece of dry paper at the end, I have a hunch that we're probably going to come back to possibly even a more damp system the next time we're in here. Kind of makes me wonder if I might want to consider leaving the plastic covers off one of these days. I mean, the system's young enough that there is a benefit to keeping things nice and damp, to keep the worms really active in all portions of the system, and not allowing anything really to get so dry that it becomes idle. Perhaps when the system starts to get a little bit older, then maybe we can start thinking about drying the material off to make it more easy to handle for harvesting. But for now, I think we're in pretty good shape here. A piece of newspaper. So here I've got a piece of newspaper. Almost covers the entire top surface. I just folded the two edges in so that there'd be a little bit of space around it, so that it doesn't come out of the edges of the paper. This way the whole thing will hopefully remain damp. And then some of the leaves on the outer edges might get a little bit dry by being exposed to the air, but that'll be fine. We'll be able to use those the next time as the foundation for our feeding. So there's a few little stems and leaves and stuff that flew all over the place. Make sure we keep all that stuff in the bin too, but I think we're pretty much done here. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to keep around for that. That's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.